Are you too busy? Too stressed out? Unhealthy? Then this is the place for you. Welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, where we help you create wellness and balance with a holistic approach that will work for you, even with the busiest of schedules, so you can live the life you want. And now, here's your host, Diane Randall.
Hello and welcome. I'm Diane Randall, your host. I want to thank you for listening. And if this is your first time, welcome. As you know, and especially if you're new, this podcast teaches the best inner tools and strategies to help you break free of habits and patterns that may be keeping you stuck in place. And it doesn't matter how busy your schedule, you can create the life you want. Would you believe me if I told you that mindset shifts can help you prepare for tough audiences or speaking engagements, and even for this show today, because I'm having troubles. Today, you're going to learn preparation tips that will save you time, ease your nerves, and improve your confidence when speaking or presenting to audiences. I'm excited to introduce you to my guest, Nicole Wells Kurtzman. Nicole coaches individuals and groups from Fortune 500 companies, major law firms, and leaders in the marketing, branding, and financial services industries. She founded the consultancy Speak Wells and has more than 15 years of training and coaching experience. Nicole has been an adjunct faculty member at New York University Stern School of Business, the School for Professional Studies, and the New School. She earned a Master of Fine Arts from Rutgers University, and she's certified by the National Guild of Hypnotists since 2014. Nicole specializes in presentation skills, handling nerves, first impressions, and impromptu speaking. Her mission is to empower even the most reluctant speakers of the world to stand up and express themselves with poise and confidence. Nicole, welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
I am just so excited that you're here because you have worked with people all over the world to help them express themselves with poise and confidence. And as we all know, that is just not an easy task.
You know, it isn't, but it is. I mean, it's one of those things that I think it's very universal for all of us at some point to second guess ourselves when we get up into a room of people. It could be our peers. It could be people that we feel that are more experienced than us. And we feel that we have to be this expert. And now we have to enlighten the world. And it's this thing that will happen where we start to second guess and we wonder, well, maybe I don't know what I know and everybody else knows more than me. And what I help people see is that in that moment, it's just the moment of you sharing what you know now. And you don't have to be the be all end all expert. And there probably will be someone in the room that might know more than you, and that's okay. And that you're just here for one specific reason and moment, and that's to share what you know. And it's a big mental shift, and is what you've been talking about. And it sounds very simple, and it is deceptively so, but that is, I think, something that all of us at some point have faced.
Oh my goodness, Nicole. When you talk about speaking, it reminded me of many years ago when I was a new speaker. And not only was I shaking like a leaf, I have all this negative self-talk going on. These people are looking at me and every expression is judgment, right? From my point of view. So it's really a out of body experience. It's really, really scary. So tell me how you were able to turn your fears into your greatest passion.
Mm-hmm. It started for me with theater, and that was a while ago because I was so shy and nervous that when I would meet people for the first time, my eyes would sort of well with tears. I would be so nervous. So then it would look like I was going to cry, which, believe me, would then make me even more nervous, and it's pretty embarrassing. And it would just start this spiral, kind of what you say. And then the people are looking at you strange and I feel strange. And I would almost start crying when I would meet people. I certainly didn't like to do public speaking. And I was somewhat forced into a theater class. And it got me used to just being, first of all, looked at. It sounds so basic, but it got me used to being in front of a group of people and getting used to having eyes on me and realizing that really they're not judging me so negatively. It's just this thing that I've, had in my head. But that was really the starting point for me. And it was a journey. And what really was the key, and as I think the thing that I keep reminding people, is that most of the time, people aren't that interested in you.
They aren't? They aren't?
if you can catch them to really sit there and be listening to you so much that they're scrutinizing everything that you say and judging you so harshly, I mean, you've got an attentive audience. I would actually prefer that than to what I think is mostly the indifferent audiences that you face. Looking at their phones, like no one's listening.
Wow.
No one cares. No one really is looking at you that way. And we ourselves judge ourselves so much more harshly than anyone else. And it's so mind-boggling. And when I finally saw myself on video and I looked at I saw what I looked like. And I remember what I felt like when I was delivering it. And I felt like you were describing, everyone's judging me and I don't know if I'm making sense. And it was this horrible experience. But then I looked at myself and I didn't look that terrified. I actually looked like a normal human being. I was stringing some cogent sentences together and it wasn't so horrible. That had a huge light bulb for me, that it was that there was this internal experience that I'm having that isn't necessarily visible to the audience. Most of the time they're not paying attention. And it was all these things coupled together that made me realize that all of this that I'm putting on myself is, I'm putting it on myself. It's self-created. And if it's self-created, then I have the power to change it.
And I hear what you say when you say self-created. I can remember just feeling, and it's what you bring to the table in terms of your self-worth, your self-doubt, because at that time I'm remembering my experience. I had a boss. This man saw more in me than I saw in myself. Mm-hmm. And we would have meetings. At that time, it was 68 people in our department. So one day he sent me off to this workshop. And then when I came back, he says, I want you to tell the team what you learned.
Right.
Oh my God. And I'm thinking, at that time I had nothing to say. I didn't open my mouth. I was really quiet. And I think he really saw that. So I stand up, I'm shaking like a leaf, and I'm having all this anxiety. I got through it, but that was the first time that I worked through my fears and it was deeper than just speaking. It was feeling like I had something worth to say. I can remember tossing that around in my negative self-talk about, what do I have to say? Right.
Exactly. And I think that's that universal feeling that a lot of people have. And I don't know, you must have talked about this before. It's that idea of the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Right. Where you feel like you're the only person in the room that shouldn't be there. They did a study, and I think this one was at Harvard Law School, and they did a survey of all the first year law students, and it was an anonymous survey. And they said, how many of you think that the admissions department made a mistake? And I think it was some astronomical amount, like 80% of the people felt that way. They're sitting in there, their first day of Harvard Law School. They should be thinking, I am amazing. I got into Harvard Law School. But instead, they're looking around thinking, oh my God, look at all these smart people. There's no way I'm going to keep up. And that's what most people were thinking. Yeah. And so it can't possibly be true, right? But so the piece that I start to say to people then is that just because you think it also doesn't make it true. We all have these thoughts that run through our heads, and just because you're thinking it doesn't make it true. I mean, I've had some really mean thoughts about people on the street that are taking their sweet time getting out of my way. And if just the thoughts that I had, if I had to be held accountable for those thoughts, they're not true. If someone were to ask me later, did you really think that about that person?
Oh my
God. Of course not. Right? But somehow it's only valid when we turn it and reflect it on ourselves. And it's a really big deal. And I'm going to give you one exercise that actually was one very specific thing that changed it for me, is that when I started hearing the negative thoughts that I had, and when I was studying hypnosis, they say a lot of the times what we do is we create our self-image by the time we're about 10 years old, which is pretty wild when you think. It's when our ego kind of develops. And I don't know if you've been around a 10-year-old or 11-year-old lately, but it's when they kind of start to develop more awareness of their peer group, and they really want to be liked by everyone else, where, kindergartners, they're still listen to you and they're so sweet, and then it changes. And so it's very interesting. So their ego changes. And so I always thought to myself, well, gosh, why would I say all these mean things that I say in my head to my 8-year-old self or my 9-year-old self? Would I say like, oh, you're so stupid, or you don't know what you're talking about, and what do you have to say? You're worthless. Would I say that out loud to an 8-year-old child? And of course I wouldn't. So I said, well, then why is it okay for me to say it to myself? And I pulled out a photo of me at 8 years old. And I said, anytime you start to have negative thoughts, you have to pull out that picture and you look at her, and I dare you to say that to her.
Mm.
And I tell you, I just stopped in my tracks, and I would say, I would never say that to her. And so in that moment, it was a moment to stop and to flip it and say, what would be better for that 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old child to hear? So yeah, maybe they are scared. Maybe they don't believe in their own voice, but how can you flip that? How can you change that? And so acknowledge the fear. Yeah, you know what? This is scary. I don't know if I know everything. What would I say to her? I would say, well, just go do your best. You know a few things. Just focus on what you know, and you'll get through this one. And then if you keep doing it, you're just going to get better and better. And you don't have to know everything. Just share what you know.
I love that, because so many people, and I've actually had clients, and the self-doubt and all the negative self-worth issues come up from childhood, typically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's so awesome that you say that, because your 10-year-old self, it was there.
Right.
But what about the people? And I was one of these 10-year-olds, and I don't know what happens in childhood. Our perceptions get changed and turned around, and we have this reality from a child, even if it's not true.
Right.
But based on our families, our conditioning, and
mm-hmm.
how we are treated as children.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say I was
mm-hmm.
treated badly, but somewhere you get a message that you're not worthy. You don't have a lot to say. Who do you think you are? So how do you help people that don't feel too good about that little child that's now an adult?
Right. Well, I think part of it is it's part of that exercise is to be able to go back and say, what would that child need?
Okay.
To get better.
Okay.
And also to think about, for yourself, like if, what would it take to turn that around? And sometimes people don't know, but it's, just taking that moment sometimes to pause and reflect and realize that it's just this habit, this conditioning that you've done, and that oftentimes these negative voices and these patterns really were coming from good intentions.
Right.
That it was trying to protect you.
Right.
And that when you did maybe feel bad about something, your brain, there's that primitive part of your brain that's like, oh, that didn't feel good. Avoid that at all costs. We don't like that. And so then you start avoiding things, and your ego starts to take a hit, and then you might not keep putting yourself out there. There's all of these things. But if you ask yourself, what might be some of the good intentions behind those messages that I'm hearing, what is that?
I love that.
It interrupts it. It's sort of, as you keep saying too, it's like it interrupts that pattern. It makes you think of it in a different way. And then you have a moment to maybe fill your brain with something else. And the more you do that, the less you're going to keep going back to that old way of thinking. But it takes diligence. I mean, you have to be aware when you do it so you don't just let those thoughts run and just keep running and running, because they will begin to control you.
And that's the thing is, like you just said, interrupt those thoughts and really, really look at each negative thought that you have that is it. And really, I mean, a lot of times it's not even true, if we really start looking, like you said, at each one. It's just a judgment, a self-judgment most of the time.
Right. And when it comes to public speaking, sometimes people will say, oh, I'm not prepared. And I would say, okay, well, is that true? Well, and then sometimes they say, well, I don't know. And I said, well, what did you do to prepare? And they've said, well, I wrote down my thoughts and I said it over my head 10 times. And then I did this and I said, well, okay, well, what more would you need to be prepared? And they're like, I don't know. And I said, I think you're prepared. I think this is what prepared is. If you don't even know what prepared feels like, then how do you know if you're prepared? You're just decided you're not. So then they look at me, oh, I never even thought of it in that way. I said, if you're going in cold, yeah, maybe you weren't prepared, but sometimes you don't know. Maybe you only have a minute before you go into a meeting and they say, oh, okay, Diane, here you go. Tell us your thoughts about that workshop. Huh? Yeah, okay, well, now it's an impromptu moment. And so then you can just completely give yourself a break because you're like, well, I couldn't possibly have prepared, right? Or if you have that 30 seconds, you just just jot down a quick few notes. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go from this. But it's like you have to give yourself some empathy and give yourself a break, because if this was happening to somebody else, you would probably do that for them. Or maybe not. That's what I say to some people. I'm like, well, maybe you're just mean. Maybe you're just one of those people. You're just super judgy. You see everybody, you're like,
right.
But that's okay. If that's you, then that's you. But most people don't do that. But it's figuring out what kind of works for you, but to not just let yourself succumb to those old patterns. And if they're true, then do something. If they're not true, now we have to figure out how to, you just keep stopping them and trying something else. That act in and of itself begins to break down the pattern. Whether you come up with something brilliant or not to say to yourself instead, the fact that you've noticed it and you've decided to try to do something else, you've begun to break the pattern.
And that's the internal part. But there's an external component. I didn't go to all the national speaking schools, where I went through the ranks of 10 speeches or whatever you have to do these days to get through that. And so I'm feeling that because I didn't do that, but what I hear you saying is it's about your own internal security and figuring out how you can best serve yourself by getting rid of those thoughts, and the external things such as not attending the best schools and going up through the ranks of the speaking schools. I mean, there's several of them out there that matter. If you don't go through any of the speaking schools, I mean, you've had plenty for many of us. And I could say mine started with training. My speaking career started with having to train people.
Right. Well, you want to have practice or experience. I think that doing is what will build that confidence. It's a learned skill, public speaking. If you could just read a book on it and learn everything and be brilliant, and walk on a big stage and do a keynote address for 1,000 people, we would all do it.
Right.
I always say it's like golf, right? Or any sport. You can't just read a book on golf and expect to go out and go win the PGA. But you will gain insights by reading books and watching people, particularly when it comes to organizing your thoughts or knowing what a structure of a talk is. There's a lot of that I think you can get very easily from the internet and the books. But then the next piece is to actually do it and find those opportunities to volunteer, to do a short talk. Look at the talks that you're doing in meetings as quote unquote public speaking. Have an intention behind that to organize your thoughts in a certain way so that you're feeling like you're getting that practice of honing your voice, your way of working. And I don't think it has to be so formalized, the study. I didn't study communications formally. I've done, of course, many, many talks. I have a theater background, and at times, there was times where I thought, oh, I should go get certified or I should go do all those things. But, I don't think that I need it. And it's fine. I have just as much to offer, or just in a different way. And I think sometimes if there's some places that are very formulaic, it can start to also hurt your voice. And I'm so much more of an inside out kind of person in finding your natural style and how we can create a template for you as opposed to you having to fit into a template.
So how do you get rid of the anxiety and nervousness at the beginning of a speech?
Right. Well, I know, right? If it's one that's been prepared and you've been practicing, I advise you, as you're even writing the talk, as you're preparing the talk, to make sure that you're breathing effectively when you practice, that you practice it very slowly, because we tend to speed up in that first few moments, to allow for those deep, calming breaths. Not that you have to be doing these huge breaths in the opening, but before I even get on the stage or behind the podium or in front of the group, I've already, when I've been preparing the talk, I've been breathing, imagining it going well, and seeing myself be successful before I've even gotten there. That moment right before, I make sure that I take a big belly breath and I've checked in my center, in my core, and I tell myself, this is about them. I'm here to present whatever I can. I've got what I've got. And I just make sure that I'm in touch with my breath. And I try to slow down in that first few moments so I can settle in. And part of it is that I also just sort of expect that my heart rate and my nervousness level is going to be higher in the beginning. It's just part of it. And I don't fight it. I just sort of expect it. It's okay, because it's an exciting time, right? It's that first few moments. And I work with it instead of against it. And I don't try to beat myself up if I feel it.
And I guess this also helps the performance in spite of the fears that you may be experiencing in small or large audiences.
Exactly. And we know that when you do really good, deep belly breaths, it can slow your heart rate and get your parasympathetic nervous system, which is that system that makes you feel calm. And it's the opposite of the fight or flight system, the sympathetic nervous system. We know that it encourages that parasympathetic nervous system to kick in. And it also supports your voice, so your voice can be stronger, and it has all of these positive effects. So if there's one thing that you do differently, it's just to focus on the breath, and not with this expectation that your heart rate is going to come down immediately, because that just takes some time. But also to know if your heart rate is going fast, that your sense of time is also going fast. If you're used to your heart rate, let's say at 60 beats per minute, right? You have an internal clock. So after 60 beats, in a sense, a minute has gone by. So now if your heart rate is up to 70 beats per minute, your sense of time speeds up. So sometimes we try to catch up with our heart, in a sense, in the beginning. So we rush. And so because I also know this, I just am very logical with myself. So I just take your time and breathe. Keep everything steady. We know this first few moments, this is part of the territory. And once I get into the swing, everything's going to flow.
Awesome. So if someone's out there listening and they have a big important speech tomorrow, what preparation tips can you share with listeners that will save them some time?
I would say the big thing is when you have a big talk and you're thinking about what a lot of people worry about is, I'm going to forget. How am I going to remember the order of things, and should I write it down? And there's this whole big thing about that. I think it's fine if you have notes, but make sure they're big, large, legible notes, and you only write down the key words or key pieces of information that you think you might forget. Like it could be a number, if we know you have to say we're up, 62% in this year's sales, I might have just down on my notes, I'll see 62% sales. So I know if I can't remember that number, I can just look down and pull that up. But that would be one thing. What I try to tell people is that when you organize a talk, you organize it in a way that feels logical to you if you're going to tell that story. So you organize it in that way, and then you just remember your key transitions. So if I'm trying to remember a speech, I don't have to say the whole thing all over. I just remember this point leads to this point. So what's the transition? What's my transition to point 1, 2, and 3? And I become obsessed with the transitions so that no matter what, if I get lost somewhere, I'll just transition to the next point because I have that through line.
I like that.
It's really helpful. And then that's the kind of thing that I would have on the page as well. So like on the page, I wouldn't have the transition. I would have key words and key things saying, oh, tell the story about having transitions. Oh, of course I know my transition story. So that I have something there to protect me if I'm afraid I'm going to forget. But I also have worked that out so much that I'm never going to forget those connectors.
Because sometimes, and I know for me, I'll forget a thought. But like, I love what you just said. You look down and you see the transition word and you say, okay, I'll just skip to that. I'll just go to that. And that kind of takes you out of, oh my God, I forgot.
Right. And, well, yeah. Exactly. And, also just remember too, that you don't want to, the other thing I want to say to people is you can't give everybody everything that you think that they could possibly need to know. And that is your job to streamline it and really think about what's in it for them. Why are they listening? What is the one key takeaway that you want them to get? What do I want them to do, think, or say as a result of this? And if you can't nail that, then, I'm worried for you because there should just be one thing. And it's very simple. It's very interesting. And so that if you're building your talk and you can really realize, oh, I just want them to know that, we need to work harder to meet our sales expectations this quarter. Let's say that's it. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Then you just know that all of your points are linking to that. And anything else that doesn't help support that point, just cut it. Cut. Really, less is more. So if you're preparing for something tomorrow, I'd say just cut half of it. just it's 10 minutes, give them 5. No one ever complains. Then ask them if they have any questions, and that's that. But I mean that really seriously. I usually try to cut as much as possible out of my talks because my instinct is to put so much in. So, I want to tell them this, and there's that. Like, there's no one's going to retain that.
Well, I must say that part is still a work in progress for me. I've gotten a lot better. I come from a technology background, so where facts are important. So
absolutely,
I really let go of a whole lot. So, and I'm listening to you today. And it probably make my life so much easier in a lot of ways. I'm going to take your advice and cut and make sure that the takeaway is what I give my audience. So this is so awesome. Nicole, I want to thank you for talking to us today and giving us your expertise and insightful tips on speaking in public, because this is a fear for many people, whether you're experienced or not. You still have the butterflies, or it's a long journey to come into speaking with ease and grace. So I want to thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I have they call them like nerve buster tips. So I wanted to offer that to the people. If they want, they can get this Nerve Busters. It's 8 specific things they can do to bust through their nerves that I would be happy to send to people if they want.
To learn more about Nicole Wells Kurtzman, you can check out her information right here on the Balanced Living for Busy Professionals show notes. And I'll have all of her information. So if you'd like to reach out to her in the future, you will be able to do so. And if you're looking for other mindset shifts, you can go to DianeRandallConsults.com and download my 5 mindset shifts to get you started as well. So I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you found something of value from this episode of Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, I want you to find 2 people in your life and share it with. Take their phones, their computer, their iPad, whatever digital device that's out there today, and show them how to subscribe to the podcast. You've been an awesome audience, and thank you so much. Leave a voicemail on the podcast page or send me an email. Be a part of the community. Let us know the topics you would like to hear more about. Your feedback helps us to bring the best health and wellness experts in the industry to bring their expertise and advice to help support you in your busy life. Thank you for listening. Get my new book, Jumpstart Your Life, Find Your Motivation, and Change Your Life One Step at a Time. This book has been released on Amazon.com and other online retailers. This book was inspired by my successful and life-changing workshops that I've been leading for over 10 years. I am now bringing my tools, techniques, and accountability structures straight to you. So if you're ready to take that first step towards the life you've always wanted, get the book and discover your capacity for success and attain your goals through a series of simple, powerful techniques. I also want you to join my private Facebook community called Jumpstart Your Life. Get resources, tips, as well as ideas as you integrate the Jumpstart Your Life process. I'll see you in the community.
Thank you for listening to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. This podcast is sponsored by DianeRandallConsults.com. If you like this show, the best way to support it is by leaving 5-star feedback on iTunes. And please, feel free to email your questions, comments, and suggestions to feedback@DianeRandallConsults.com. Until next week, namaste.